it's Penny here, and today we're going to be having a look at some of my 2021 reading goals as well as some of my associated reading statistics. I know it's already February 2022, but it's taken me a while to get going this year, and that's okay. So please ignore the mess behind me. I've got my computer set up in front of me so I can look at some of my spreadsheet statistics as we go through this. So in 2021, I set myself 5 goals, but I'm actually going to talk about an unspoken goal first. So pretty much every year I just set my Goodreads reading challenge to 100 books. I think it's a good amount, 1 physical book and 1 audiobook a week, and it usually balances out. There's a few shorter ones that go quicker and a few longer ones that go longer. And in fact, if I look at my statistics here, I can see I read 145 books this year. But if I look even more at the statistics, I can see that about 40 of those were under 100 pages. So perhaps if we didn't count those, you would kind of say I really did read 100 properly sized book things, but reading anything should count. So 145 books, I'm pretty happy with that, especially because I was working all last year and busy and stressed. So I'm glad I could keep up my reading as well. And I think 100 books is a good amount that I'm going to stick with. I almost don't think about that goal anymore as a real goal. Also probably somewhat interesting to look at is that the number of books I read per month was pretty steady, except that March and April were standout months where I read a shit ton somehow. I think it may have been graphic novels. Oh, do I have that graph? I do. Yeah, I think March and April is when I read pretty much the whole of the Giant Days graphic novels, and these Giant Day graphic novels are going to come up a lot because I read 15 of them. They're very short. They're technically contemporary, which isn't something I read a lot of, and so I think they're going to throw off a lot of my statistics. So let's look forward to that. Although, if you look at the pages read monthly, March and April are still up. August, quite high, which is interesting. But after August, I pretty much just dive bombed and didn't read much at all. But then conversely, if you look at hours read each month, November was a great month for audiobooks. I think just because the weather started getting nicer, I started going for a lot of walks and listening to audiobooks. The rest of the year, kind of just all the same. December, we're not talking about December. Not a great month. In fact, we can talk about this a little bit more later when we come to the last goal, but monthly average rating, December also bombed, so not ideal. All right, then let's get into the 5 actual goals that I set. So the first one I had is that I wanted to get to TBR Zero. And for each of these, I had a tactic of how I was going to achieve it throughout the year. This one, my goal was to read 3 books a year, and I think that would have got me just over having read all the books on my TBR because I was expecting to add some throughout the year, which I did. I don't actually remember how many books I had at the start of 2021 anymore. I could go and try and find out, but I'd probably have to do a whole bunch of work, and I don't want to. But my tactic was that I would read 3 books a month. So let's see how I did with that. Oh dear. So it looks like I read 3 books 5 of the 12 months of the year. The other ones, I mostly read 2. No, there's 4 months that I only read 1 book off my TBR. So I'm a little bit short of that, and I'm also a little bit short of TBR Zero. But I'm super close, so I still feel like even though I didn't make the goal completely, I got close enough that I still feel good about it. And TBR Zero was a stretch in 2021, but in 2022, it's so easily doable. So I did well at setting myself up for that. That's how we're going to look at it. Then the second reading goal that I set, I always knew was going to be a stretch and was probably unlikely I'd make it, and that is Series Zero. So to have all the series that I have in progress completed. Somewhere along the way during the year, I calculated how many books I would actually have to read to do that, and it's well over 100 books. And I keep thinking of series that I've missed off the list that I do want to finish. So even more out of reach than I expected. As well, my tactic for achieving this was going to be that I would finish 1 series every month. I think I did do this. However, I didn't keep any record of that, and digging through to check that would be annoying. So let's just assume that I did it. That seems like a nice thing to do. But I didn't make Series Zero. I think I'm going to save that goal for this year. Oh, I also had a tactic of not starting any new series, and I can tell you I definitely did not do that. But some of the series that I started were ones that I really loved, so I'm not really sad about that either. Okay, then my next goal was diversity, and there were a few different things that I specifically wanted to target within this. So firstly, I wanted to read at least one Maori or Pacific authored book every 2 months, so I was keeping the bar pretty low. In the beginning, I really struggled with this because I couldn't really find any Maori authored books that I thought I would like. Especially like I was struggling to find modern ones that were like fantasy or science fiction. However, a little bit into the year, I discovered Huia Publishers, and they made it much easier to find these ones that I really like. And since then, I think overall, I ended up reading 9 Maori authored books. Now, admittedly, I didn't read any Pacific authored books. What's the right word? Pacific Islander authored books. I just couldn't find a good source for ones that I thought I would like. I honestly have a suspicion that a lot of Pacific Islanders struggle to get published, and so that's what I'm going to have to do some more work on, I think. But still, I found some really great Maori authored books. I now know some Maori authors that I really like, and I think this is going to be something that's really easy to continue going forward without even really tracking it, which is good, because we're going to get into a problem that I had with tracking the authors by race. So my second tactic to the diversity goal was to read less than 70% white authors. And honestly, I didn't achieve this, but I was so close. And if I hadn't ruined December, I think I could have done it. So I ended up reading 71% white authors. But if we compare that to the previous year where I read 76, that's quite a drop, so maybe not terrible. I do think that checking in on it every month did help me to keep on track with this. However, I ruined January because I wasn't tracking it yet, and I ruined December because I ruined everything in December. That was my life. So I didn't track anything in December, and I didn't finish most of the books that I wanted to read, or I might have actually made this goal. The other thing I do want to call out with this one, so if I'm looking at the ratings for each kind of race, and it feels weird to be looking at the ratings per race, to be honest. But the ones that I rated the lowest were the Asian authored books. And I think that's because I was focusing so much on finding Maori authored books that I liked. And there's a lot of talk now about Black authored books on BookTube, so those were easy to find. But actually, I was always at the last minute being like, oh crap, I don't have enough Asian authored books, and I know there are some Asian authored books out there that I really love. Some of them are my absolute favorites, but because I was always trying to find them at the last minute, I'd have to just go for audiobooks and what was available, and they often weren't ones that I thought I would love, and so a lot of them turned out to be ones that I rated slightly lower. I mean, very slightly lower, but I do think I'd like to do a better job of finding Asian authored books that I'm going to really like, rather than just picking up random ones and then not liking them as much. So another issue that I had really was tracking per race is that not everybody is even clear on what their race is themselves. So like sometimes you look at someone, you're like, what's their race? You try and have a look at looking it up. Sometimes people don't tell you. Really, if they don't want to tell you, then it's their private business, right? And some people also have like not a very good relationship with like their parents, and so then their heritage becomes quite muddy. I mean, I would say personally I'm like 1/16 Maori, and where I stand on claiming that heritage is different on different days. And I did find a couple of authors when I was trying to look up what their race was, talking about how they weren't really comfortable talking about their race for different reasons. And so really I don't particularly like tracking this. I liked the idea of putting numbers on things and trying to match like the population distribution, rather than just aiming at random targets that had no basis in why I was picking those numbers. But also I feel like race as a categorization system is already kind of a crappy thing that humans have made up. So I don't know the best way to track this ongoing. I also think that I'm better to focus on that sourcing of material that I'm going to like by people of different races. So that's, I think, what I'm going to focus on more in 2022. I think I'm going to make a different video about my reading goals for 2022, but this is definitely one where I want to think about it a lot more, about how I do this bit. especially with some of the other goals I know I have this year. The last part that I had in diversity was that I wanted to read more than one non-binary author. And what I meant by this is that I think in 2020, I did okay with like hitting a percentage that I was aiming for. I can't remember what I was actually aiming for. Do I have that here? I can't remember what I was aiming for, but what I found is that I did read a few books by non-binary authors throughout the year of 2020, but it was all the same author, which didn't really feel like reading diversely. So this year I had a goal of reading like different non-binary authors. So I wanted to read at least 2 different non-binary authors, and if I read multiple works by them, that's fine, which I did read multiple works by Sarah Gailey this year. But I also know I read something by Karen Tidbeck, and who else? Wait, I can pull this up. Oh, and also Nino Supri. So only 3, but I met the goal. Definitely I am starting to know about more non-binary authors though, so that's good. And I've recently discovered Andy Buchanan, one of my favorite authors who is non-binary, has put out some more stuff while I wasn't paying attention, so I'm going to be remedying that very soon. And I guess if we just look at gender in general, like I think 3.4% non-binary is more than I think the representation in the population, although I expect that that is going to change over time, so that's exciting. Now, I definitely want to read more non-binary authors, especially Karen Tidbeck and Andy Buchanan and Sarah Gailey, but also some new ones. So please leave me comments down below if you've got recommendations. I do think, when I look at it, like it seems like male and female is pretty even, but why is male more? I think I need to be reading less male-authored books again. What I've found is because I've been trying to read a lot of hyped fantasy and catch up on books that are very hyped, that's leading to me reading more male authors. It's just rubbish. I don't want to do that anymore. Interestingly, what I have found is that I do rate non-binary and what I call various, which is where there's 2 people writing together and there are different genders. So those I rate much higher than I rate male and female authored books by themselves. Interesting? A fluke? Who knows, but just a sign that I need to read more of those books maybe. Alright, then my next goal was to diversify the genres that I'm reading. So I know historically I've read a lot of fantasy, I really love fantasy, but I also wanted to read more science fiction, and I wanted to read kind of more mystery, thrillers, and horrors. So my tactics here. First bit was less fantasy. I don't actually know if I did this. I haven't even looked at it yet. I was looking at my stats. Oh yeah, so a lot of these I know. Why is this one such an ugly color? Okay, so in 2020, I read 58.9% fantasy. And in 2021, I only read 46.5% fantasy. So that's a lot less, possibly even less than I was planning. I think I might read more fantasy in 2022, but that's a win. So we'll take it. And what I wanted to do instead of reading so much fantasy is, firstly, I wanted to read a 20% science fiction. So in 2020, I had read 17.9% science fiction, which is actually pretty close to 20% anyway. Oh dear. In 2021, I only managed to get that up to 18.1, which is only like 0.2% higher. It's probably like a rounding thing because I read a different number of books. Wait, 26 versus 30. I actually read more science fiction books by number in 2020 than I did in 2021. However, that's silly because I do feel like I read more good science fiction. So science fictions that I rated highly in 2021. So I can see my average rating for science fiction in 2021 was 3.4, whereas in 2020 it was only 3.2. I know that doesn't seem like much, but when you average out a lot of books, they all kind of tend to come out in the middle there somewhere, at least for me. So I don't know if I can count this read more science fiction as a win. I know that in my top books of the year, like 7 of the 11 books were science fictions. So I definitely read a lot of science fictions that I love. I was loving reading science fiction in 2021. This is a sign that I need to keep reading more science fiction, isn't it? I think so. The other thing that I wanted to do was read more than 15% of thrillers and horrors and mysteries. So I actually read, oh, this is 2020. In 2020, I read 10.7%, so I wanted to get that up to 15, and in fact I got it up to 15.3, so this is another one that I have achieved. What I do think with this, so if I'm looking at it, my mystery thrillers were the lowest rated of all the genres that I read, and so that's a sign, like what I think I really need to do is find some more thrillers that I actually really like. Like I don't really know what kind of thrillers I like, and I find it so hard when I see people talking about thrillers to know whether they're going to be ones I like, because some thrillers I've really loved, but then others people have said were really great and then I've hated them. Also, I'm really bad at just hearing the names of thrillers and then listening to them, and then after I read them and hated them, realizing that when I first heard about them, it was someone saying it was terrible, so why did I end up reading it? And I think as well this is because often I just pick up thrillers that are available on audiobook at the library, and the audiobooks that are available with no whole queue at the library are usually not the best, or they're really old. Sometimes hard to tell the difference. So I need to start putting together a proper list of thrillers that I think I'll like, and then actually seeking those out. So if you have any thrillers you think I like, I know I've asked for these recommendations before and I think I haven't even read all of the recommendations because I'm an idiot. But if you have some thrillers you think I'd like, then do leave them down below. Science fiction thrillers is something I do sometimes. I think I normally count them as sci-fi. So that could be why this is lower, because a lot of the science fiction thrillers that I do love, I mark as sci-fi, and that gives sci-fi a higher rating. Okay, then we have one last goal that I had for the year, and that was to increase my average rating. I felt like I was still reading just a lot of books that I randomly heard about, or books that were available at the library on audiobook, and my average rating was fairly low. I don't mind it being low to some point, because I do like to have like that bell curve distribution of the ratings I'm giving. I guess I do want it to be more like, what is that distribution curve called? I forget. But the one where there's a tail at the bottom and then it goes up. I guess that's what I actually want. Like mostly 4 stars, some amazing 5 stars, some 3 stars I didn't like as much, and then maybe a smattering of 1 and 2 stars. I probably did do that in 2020, kind of. I did change the way that I was mapping my spreadsheet where I rate things against 5 criteria and then average it up. I changed how I was mapping those numbers to like the ratings that I do in Goodreads. So that did kind of get me more the distribution that I'm looking for, although I would still like more 5 stars, but I got a lot more 5 stars, like 10% 5 stars in 2021 and only 9.5% 5 stars in 2020. So up 0.5%. Let's take it as a win. But anyway, I actually said that I wanted the number to increase. So I think I wrote, why can I not see this? On my goals, I wrote that I wanted it to be greater than 3.24, which I must have thought was the average for 2020. It looks like the average for 2020 was more like 3.28. Also interesting, in 2020 you can see right at the end of the month my average ratings went up. Right at the end of the year I read a bunch of books that I really loved. Then when you look at 2021, the exact opposite, right? Like I bombed at the end of the year. So I need to get more of that 2020 energy at the end of the year rather than that crash. However, I don't know where I got the number 3.24, but what I did manage to do is I did manage, hang on, I'll give us one more decimal place. I did manage to get my average rating to 3.37. So it went up like 0.13. It's only a tiny little inch up. I was trying to get to maybe 3.5. Obviously, I didn't select my books well enough to achieve that. I do think, like I said previously, part of that would have been when I was just trying to meet some of those other goals and I was picking books up without really... Again, my camera stopped. I don't know exactly when, but what was I talking about? Oh, I was saying something about how, you know, I rushed picking up Asian authored books and selecting good Asian authored books, and I also rushed picking up thrillers. So I think if I improve those two, we do a lot better. However, I do think in 2022 there's going to be some problems with my reading goals. Realize some of these reading goals don't fit well together, and so in 2022 I think I'm going to try and be more focused so that I'm not kind of sabotaging myself And while we're here in my statistics spreadsheet, I'm just wondering if there's anything else that's particularly interesting. I didn't really talk about in terms of like the source of the books that I read. So about 20% of the books that I read were off my TBR, where 10% were physical books from the library, then 40% were audiobooks from the library. So like 50% of my reading was from the library and 50% of my reading was audiobooks, because I read about 10% of my books from Audible. And then about 20% were library ebooks, but again, that's Giant Days messing with that. Oh, and that was the other place I was going to mention Giant Days, is like when you look at the genres that I read, contemporary, 16%. That is way up from 2020. In 2020, I only read 7% contemporary, so it's like double that. But that's purely Giant Days messing with that. I didn't... Oh, and also the Babysitter's Club graphic novel adaptations. Those are just ruining my stats, and they're going to continue to ruin my stats in 2022 a little bit as well, probably. I do also have some stats about the release year that books I read were from. And what I found is that 15% of the books that I read were from 2021, whereas in 2020, well, 2020 was about the same, 15%. I think that's probably okay. Actually, looking at the percentages, I think I kept the percentages pretty even, which is interesting. Although I have to admit the groupings that I have in these categories, kind of random, don't make a lot of sense. Okay, I poked around. I think that's probably the most interesting statistics that I have in my spreadsheet. As for my reading goals, I think that looking through that made me think I did a little bit worse than I felt like I did. And really, I'm just going to try and forget about that, because I'd rather just feel the way that I felt, which is that I read some really good books, and I also managed to do a few other things that I was trying to achieve as well. So in a few days, I will take these reflections and thoughts and see if I can come up with some better reading goals for 2022. Do let me know how you went with your reading goals in 2021. Did you achieve what you wanted to achieve? Did you at least make progress? That's the important thing. And do you think it's going to change the way that you set your goals in 2022? Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.